Rahim. Welcome back to the program. Our next guest is Mohammed Kharwa. He's from SAMNET, and that, of course, is the South African Muslim Network. We are going to be talking about encouraging community involvement in school governing bodies. And of course, this is to advocate for Muslim children's interests in public schools. So, Mohammed, salaam alaikum to you. Welcome to the program. And before we get to the heart of the matter regarding this issue, I need to just outline something because I know with SAMNET and Dr. Faisal Suleiman, close to all of your hearts and our hearts as Muslims is the issue of the genocide playing out in Palestine. And
Yes.
just before you came on, I don't know if you heard the last part of my previous interview. It was with Mari Sukkers, the MP for the ACDP. I don't know if you heard that.
I only got part of it. Unfortunately, the connection wasn't great, so I can't speak completely on what exactly she said. But from the parts that I did actually pick up, I mean, it is very disappointing. I think yes, I think that the Middle East is not a simple solution. In terms of you have people who are in a space, and somebody's gonna have to come out with a very intelligent way of trying to deal with what we've got. But I think that the problem in the creation and the root cause of the problem is not as complicated as people sometimes like to make it out. And I think that it's sometimes in the interest of some people to be able to try and defer this and make it one purely of religion. It isn't. It is not in many ways a religious issue. It is people who are using religion to try and divide and to try and find ways to justify the dispossession of people, the dispossession of people's land. And even with all of that, what is happening in Gaza at this point in time, what is happening in Palestine, is beyond the basic tenets of humanity. We can
Absolutely.
argue about whether it is religion and what the role is, etc. But we've got to start off with the basics of humanity. And from a human perspective, we cannot see in 2024 a world where children are starving to death, not out of any natural circumstance, not out of any natural event, but purely out of a man-made intentional starvation. And that over there is inhumane. That over there is intentional. And from that perspective, I think parties like the ACDP, parties, other parties that have kind of tried to skirt this issue, and some who have come out blatantly, in support of Israel, are showing a level of dehumanizing the Palestinian people, and we have to speak out against that. What I find very frustrating in other ways is the fact that we're seeing it over and over again, where the attempt and the effort to try and deal with this and to try and address this is almost painted as a polarization rather than any will to understand anything different. And the first point of call is that things did not start on the 7th of October. There are hundreds of children on a daily, weekly basis who are abducted by the Israeli Defense Force. This is not stats that are from some obscure entity trying for propaganda. These are stats from independent bodies. The Human Rights Commission, United Nations Council for Human Rights, Amnesty International. They're talking about that. And when a child is taken away by somebody in uniform, that does not make it any less of a kidnapping. We don't want to see violence. We don't want to see things escalate. We don't want to see any, actions that are counter to Islam and to the values that we have by any party. But we can't we can't start this discussion by saying everything is down to one event, when there is a sequence of events that leads to that. And we have to recognize the right of self-defense exists. It is the right of fighting. It's simple terminology we need to start going back to. Um, uh, some of you may remember there was a point in time when there was a series called V on TV many years ago, and what it spoke about was, it was science fiction, etc. But underlying it, and apparently, if I remember correctly, at the time I was much younger then. I had a lot more hair, and at that point in time, when it came out, one of the things that was done was they dedicated it to freedom fighters, and the South African government actually had to edit and ban it or try and suppress it, because they realized only after the first few episodes that in the introduction they recognized that the ANC were fighting for freedom. So fighting for freedom, and the word freedom fighters has simply disappeared from the language because it suits some people to not be able to recognize people's right to deal and to fight against an oppression. So we have to be very careful in how we deal with this, and I think that we have to recognize that South African government, for whatever faults and flaws that it may have as well, has taken a very bold and principled stance that nobody else in the world was willing to do for the last 70 years. They've taken that stance. We are, looking to use all the tools available, and some of those tools are the legal route. So we've got to recognize that. We've got to respect that, and we are disappointed when parties are trying to just kind of frame this as a narrative that they are given and that they're handed to, and things are being, the first victim of war is always considered to be the truth. And we've seen that with the reports that have come out that have been debunked, with the where people in the media have just taken at face value what they were told, and now even entities that supposedly have the vigor of the New York Times and journalists have been proven to be taking a position that just doesn't make sense, and that not verifying what they have actually done and reported, and taking propaganda and replaying it. So we've got to sit down. But I think the first point is that we do need to sit down and have very intelligent conversations with our compatriots in South Africa. We cannot change people's minds by screaming and shouting at them. We have to sit down. We have to debate issues. We've got to be able to put those people on the spot. We've got to be able to present our arguments. Um, but it also comes from whether or not they have already decided an outcome. And I think our history so I could go on for this for the next hour, but I think
Well,
we do have limited.
no, actually, I'm going to ask your indulgence, if you don't mind, Mohammed.
Sure.
I'd like to continue with this specific discussion
Okay.
and ask you if we can talk about the SGBs, the upcoming
Yes.
2024 SGB elections, if we can talk with you about that tomorrow, because I think what
Okay.
we're discussing right now is pretty important as well. And I do
Yeah.
know that Dr. Faisal Suleiman has been
Yes.
talking for a long time about us as a Muslim community, training young people, getting people to join media, and for them to understand,
Yeah.
study, and understand how important and powerful the media space is, so that we can tell our truth to the rest of the world. He's been going on about this for a long time. He's also been
Yeah.
saying this is where we need to be throwing our money, because we
Exactly.
need, I mean, when we look at the Hasbara, just look how powerful they are. And our voices are so meek and
Yes.
small next to these powerful bodies, not only from Israel, but all over the world. So that was such a valid point. And I do hope and pray that SAMNET, ASRI, and all of these organizations start thinking in this, in this light, and start preparing and grooming young people to take up the space and start putting out the narrative, the correct narrative of us as Muslims, the Muslim position, what Islam is all about, and particularly the Palestinian situation. And
So,
inshallah, I'm hoping and praying that when the Palestinians are eventually emancipated, we still have lots of work to do. There's issues
Definitely.
around the Uyghur Muslims. There's so many Muslim
So yeah.
communities that are marginalized, and we need to start working on all of that. We have a
So
lot of work to do.
yeah. So I'd like to come in there if you don't mind. And I think one of the things that we've done is, so SAMNET started a program. It's now over a decade ago, trying to specifically earmark bursaries for students um, who are studying in spaces like media, journalism, political, politics and
Science. Mhm.
science, political science, and communication, with the view that we need people who can speak, who are trained professionally to do that, and who can develop careers in that space to be able to actually address, and be there in those spaces. Alhamdulillah, we've had some exceptional successes. We don't go out and publicly mention who are the people that we have actually supported through their education. We've got some really exceptional outcomes. Just last week, Alhamdulillah, at a Salam Media event, Kunita Hunter, mentioned that part of her studies were supported by SAMNET, and she recognized that that's the important space, and that was. It's important to be able to make sure that people are not thinking about where they're going to get their funding, when in fact they actually are going to be able to to focus on their studies. So we've tried to do that. I use the example when I met recently with our ulama bodies, and I said, if we take the amount that we spend on relief and support, we need to actually start allocating 1%, just 1%, towards preventing the problem in the first place. So we spend millions of rands. Alhamdulillah, we are fortunate that we have that to spend, that we are able to contribute towards that. But we spend millions and millions of rands towards dealing with the consequences of what happens in the political space and in the social space around us. We need to spend just 1% towards preventing those problems, and having people in spaces like journalism, in political science, in the structures of our civil society, in the structures of our public service, is critical to do that. Because if we don't have people who we can depend on to have a level of values, ethics, and morality, to be able to step up and say what is right and what is wrong, using the guidance from the Quran and the Sunnah, and our values, then we actually exclude ourselves from that discussion. So we need to be in every space. We need to be in every forum. We need to actually make sure that we are represented in there. But we can't be represented in there by just parachuting ourselves into the narrative at the end point. We have to actually work our way there. Kunita Hunter didn't start off as the assistant political editor of News 24. She did her time. She spent time in our community stations. She then moved into different spaces in the political space. She cut her teeth. She did the legwork. She had to learn the skills and the art of journalism. In the live environment, a qualification creates the platform for that. So we're creating platforms for people. We've had a young lady who I spoke to last night, who's completed her honors in journalism, supported through us, who now is joining the Daily Maverick. Now, it might be an intern or an entry level role. It's no longer an internship, but it's an entry level role that she may have. But that's the step into the space and the step into the career. And she's going to have to take 10 years to develop before she, inshallah, will have the opportunity to be having an impact. And we don't just need people who are the presenters in the face. We need people who are choosing to be the producers. I'm sure you have a phenomenal team behind you to be able to
Absolutely.
put your show together. You
Absolutely.
might be the face, and they're the ones who have to do all of the other stuff to get to that point. And they've got to understand the issue as well as you do, to be able to identify who the people are, who needs to be there, coordinate between them, get people on at the right time, the right place, all of those things. So all of those factors are critical, and SAMNET's been, kind of talking about this and trying to push this. And Alhamdulillah, we seeing, it's taken a very long time for different leaders and parts of our community to step up and say, oh, now we understand where you are coming from. But Alhamdulillah, we are getting there slowly. Unfortunately, there are people who are very insular in our community, who have very kind of short term and very immediate kind of thoughts. But we've got to recognize that change happens over generations. And just to mention, on the school governing body side, there are schools, we to try and relate an issue. There are issues around, an example we had recently where the topic of Israel, Palestine, Gaza, what is happening. There are some educators who are kind of veering away from having to address the issue, because we almost believe that they've been preconditioned, as to not talk about it because it's too controversial. But I asked the question of an educator, or in discussion with an educator, I said, if we've got an opportunity to learn by living history, and this is living history at this point in time, we can either deal with our children by saying, go and learn what happened 50, 100, 300, and 500 years ago, or we can tell them, learn by what's happening now. You are making history. You are a witness to history. What are you doing about that? And that is going to teach a lot more than necessarily trying to just. You have to learn the history to be able to understand the context, but you have to understand the context and what is currently happening to be able to make a difference in the future. And so those are kind of decisions, again, coming back to maybe, and we will talk about the governing bodies tomorrow, but the influence that we have and the opportunity we have to be able to influence the education of our youth. We're very, very fortunate in South Africa that a lot of our elders from the previous generations invested in building schools, building infrastructure, madrasas, making sure that our women are educated, making sure that we have bursaries and funds for people to go to university. And when those people took that view, they were not thinking about themselves. They were not thinking about their, financial benefit. They were not thinking about, 3 years and 5 years in another election. They were thinking about not even our generation, but the generations to come. And we
Absolutely.
need to start thinking in not just, 5 and 10 and even one generation. We need to start thinking, what is the plan for our South African Muslim community in 2100? It might seem
Absolutely.
far-fetched, but if we go to our masajid and we look at what is happening, I mean, I've been to Cape Town and I've visited, Awal Masjid. I've been to Johannesburg and I've visited the masjid in Fitas. I've been to Durban and you visit Riverside Masjid. You look at where that has come from and what is behind that. These are
Absolutely.
people who invested, in intergenerational visions. And we unfortunately have people who are very, very focused on just the here and now and wanting to try and knee-jerk reactions, and make themselves feel good rather than taking very, very strategic positions.
Okay, Mohammed, we've got to wrap up because my next guest is standing by. Salila will be talking with you tomorrow regarding the SGB elections. And I just want to very quickly wrap up on the end of my discussion with Mari Sukkers. She's the MP for ACDP, and she shocked me out of my boots when she said this. I asked her what was her view on Palestine. I don't know if you heard that part. Did you hear
I
that
heard
part of
bits
the
of it.
conversation?
I heard
Okay,
parts
then
of. I heard part of the response. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, then I'm not going to repeat it, but you do know that we have our work cut out for us now because they don't understand. It seems as if the Christian community or the rest of the world don't seem to understand the difference between Judaism and Zionism. And I had to explain to her very briefly on air about that difference. But
So,
there just was not
so
enough time
yeah,
to go into that.
yeah.
And I think
I
there's
think,
lots of work that we need to be
yeah,
doing.
definitely. And
But
we on that. Sorry, just to wrap up. And apologies for taking the extra minute. I hope your guest doesn't mind. On that, we are guilty. And we've got to lift our hand up and we've got to take responsibility for that as well. Because what we have been doing for a very, very long time is isolating ourselves from those spaces. This morning, there was a discussion on one of the groups that I am on around participation in interfaith events. I'm not talking about where people are going out and praying. I'm talking about engagement with government.
And
So
that's
if
very
government
important.
wants to
It's very,
talk,
very
exactly, if
important that
government
our
wants to talk,
voices are heard.
exactly. And the idea that we must isolate ourselves, if government says, I want to talk to religious leaders, I have to sit in, or not myself, but our leaders have to sit in that room and have to say, well, I may disagree completely with the person's position, but I have to be in that room. And if I'm not in that
Absolutely.
room, then what voice do I have? Or alternatively, the person who's then going to speak on my behalf is going to be someone who has a very, very different view, and they're going to further their narrative. So unless we are there, unless we are actively involved, unless we make the time and effort, and to a large extent, unless we actually invest in that through funding, through putting our money towards these programs,
Absolutely.
we are going to be sitting in exactly the same boat in 30 years. If not, we are going to be much worse off. And Dr. Faisal Suleiman has raised that point repeatedly. He says if we don't vote in our elections, if we don't vote intelligently in what we are doing, if we don't hold people accountable for the positions and the views that they have, then we need to also accept that in a few years, like has happened in other parts of the world. I met with one of the founders or people who were involved in the founding of the Muslim Council of Britain when I was ago. I made the time to go in, during my what was supposed to be a family holiday. I made the time to sit with him and to listen to him. And he had described to me how the relationship of the Muslim community with the British government improved and got to a point where they were engaging and they were on the front line and they could deal with issues and they were starting to have impact. And one thing goes in and changes that. And now there's a concerted effort to shut them out. And this is not an insignificant community. This is a Muslim community in the UK who have influence, who have been there for a long time, who are contributing to society in a massive way. But they are struggling to get in through that because they're not engaging, or people are withdrawing from the engagement. Alhamdulillah, we've got to keep knocking on that door. We've got to be able to speak smartly on these things.
I am so sorry to have cut you short
No
there, but I
problem.
have to go. We've got our next guest, but Salilo will pick
Thank
up with you tomorrow. Thank you indeed. That was very important that we followed through with this train of thought because it's important. Our people need to wake up to this fact. Mohammed Kharwa from SAMNET, thank you indeed for your thoughts. And Assalamu alaikum to you. It is exactly 10 o'clock. Suraya Bibi Khan Bayat is standing by to talk to us. Let's take a quick short break, and then we'll join Suraya.